Welcome to today's webinar, Practitioners' Insights, IBOR Transition Changes and Challenges, hosted by CFA Society India. I'd like to take a moment to welcome our audience from around the world joining us remotely, especially on a public holiday on the festive occasion of Eid. I am Sivananth Ramachandran, CFA, Director of Capital Markets Policy, India at CFA Institute, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. Before I introduce our speaker, I have a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's webinar is scheduled for 60 minutes, including Q&A. We'll be leaving time for Q&A after the presentation. Please feel free to submit your questions throughout the presentation. You can do so by clicking the Q&A link at the bottom of your viewer and typing the questions. The webinar presentation will be available to view after the presentation concludes in the chat box. And finally, we value feedback. So please complete your evaluation survey before you sign off today. On the topic of IBOR transition, excuse me, LIBOR is often referred to as the world's most important number. Globally, it underpins $400 trillion worth of loans and derivatives, whether it's variable rate mortgages or interest rate swaps. It is expected to be phased out in 2021, but the transition will not be smooth. To talk about this, we have Subrahmanyam Oruganti, or Subbu as his friends call him. Subrahmanyam is a partner in Ernst & Young, India. He has over 13 years experience in financial services. Currently, he leads the quantitative advisory services in EY, India, focusing on risk management, quantitative solutions like model development, model validation, new regulatory programs like CCAR, IBOR, IFRS 9, for several banks, including iBanks, Asian banks, and Indian banks. Prior to EY, he worked in Northern Trust, leading their model validation team in India. Welcome, Subbu, and you can start your presentation. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Shiva. I hope I'm audible to every one of you. Thanks a lot for giving this opportunity, CFA Institute, for talking about this IBOR transition. This LIBOR transition is one of the major reforms in the financial industry. If I compare it for the last 10 to 15 years, I think this is one of the major reforms. And as I say, this reform is usually possible only once a sense of crisis takes hold. And we cannot solve the problem with the same kind of thinking we use when we actually created the problem. So, I'm not talking about the current COVID-19 crisis. I'm talking about something even, I would say, bigger in the financial circles that happened in 2007 and 8 that has rocked the entire financial industry really badly. And that has actually resulted in a lot of the reforms in the banking industry, and one of them has its roots going back to the 2007 and 8 financial crisis. So let me just start sharing my screen. So before actually talking about the IBOR transition story, I would like to quickly talk about what is LIBOR and its background and its actual importance in the financial market before we talk about the 2007 and 8 crisis. So here, as you see, as in whenever I, throughout this entire presentation, when I'm talking about a LIBOR or an IBOR, I'm not referring to just one rate. I'm actually referring to rates across 5 different currencies and 7 different tenor points. So effectively, we're talking about 35 different rates that are quoted on a daily basis. So just to give you some background, LIBOR started publishing way back in 1970 May, and it's the rate at which the textbook definition is the rate at which the large internationally active banks lend to each other in the interbank market. And most importantly, this is all unsecured. And this is ranging from the overnight going towards until 12 months. In order to understand the usage and the breadth and the depth of the IBOR, as you can see in this particular slide, you see that the kind of products that are being traded that are referencing LIBOR include something like a deposits, bonds, and it includes the OTC derivative products, loans, credit cards, and everything. And in terms of the market segments also, you see that the market segments again range from the investment banks, retail banks, hedge funds, asset managers, whatever you call. So specifically, I assume everyone who is there in this room would be impacted by this LIBOR transition in one way or the other. So that shows the kind of importance of the LIBOR in the financial markets. And this is from the perspective of the breadth of the IBOR. And when I talk about the depth in terms of the materiality of the LIBOR transition, you see that as Shiva initially mentioned, that actually close to $400 trillion of the transactions across the globe are referencing LIBOR. Again, obviously, majority of these things are coming from USD. But you see that even in Euribor or in Japan or everywhere, you see that the kind of transactions that are referencing LIBOR is huge, actually. And even in India also, the equivalent of LIBOR is what we call as a MIFOR. And the initial estimates showed that even MIFOR also, which references something like an ECBs, NRI deposits, short-term debt, derivatives, and everything, it is referencing more than $1 trillion. And to put things in perspective, the global GDP in 2019 is only $85 trillion. So the impact of IBOR, if you see, if you put things in perspective, it's like 4 times the global GDP also. So when the rate that is so important and that is used so widely is actually transitioning away, then obviously the impacts are also going to be very, very severe. So let me just talk about what went wrong in 2008. I think this LIBOR started trading from way back in 1970s. And in 1986, it is actually taken over by what we call as the British Bankers Association. This is based out of London, and they take the poll of this IBOR 35 rate, which we talked about, on a daily basis at 11 a.m. London time. And everything is going very well until 2007 and 2008. There are no known crises or no manipulations involved at that time. But the subprime crisis of 2007 and 8, as you know, I think it has hit the financial markets very, very badly. And there were some major players that have gone bankrupt, the likes of Lehman Brothers, etc. When they started becoming bankrupt, frankly, people stopped trusting their peer banks. So what happened is people were not ready to lend to the peer investment banks in the same circle, which used to be the case. So, but still, obviously, the BBA would require them to give the LIBOR quotes. So, as in the LIBOR quotes, which used to be based on the transaction based, has started moving away slowly from transaction based, because they have to give the quote as per the BBA on every day. And the interbank market has started drying up because people are finding it extremely tough in 2008-9 to get funding from the interbank market. So typically what people started to do, obviously they have a lot of assets, so they need funding from somewhere. They started moving towards more and more sticky fixed deposits. They started attracting the fixed deposit customers, the retail customers, and everything. So and also the regulators also, as I initially said, this 2008 crisis did not lead to only one reform. It has actually led to multiple reforms in the capital side. Capital started moving away from what we call as a Basel 2.5 to something called as an FRTB now. And also in the liquidity also, newer regulations on LCR, NSFR, everything started surfacing post 2007 and 8. So what effectively is happening is people, if they are borrowing in the interbank market, the capital requirement is ballooning. So people stopped lending in the interbank market, And then all these transactions started becoming more and more expert judgment. So LIBOR, which used to be quoted based on the transactions, became expert judgment. And as you know, if there is any expert judgment involved, obviously there is a chance of manipulation. So that is exactly what has happened. So what happened is people started realizing that they can give any quote and get away. And this actually started in there is a lot of LIBOR scandals that have happened. The major one which was surfaced the first time was from Barclays. The regulators have found that the Barclays traders allegedly were giving lower LIBOR quotes whenever there is any receivable, whenever there are any payables from their side. So especially if say LIBOR is especially a pooled rate. So if 12 banks have colluded and everyone has started giving lower LIBOR rates, then the payables from their side is going down. That's exactly what happened. So Barclays started it, and then people started investigating, and then they found that Barclays did not do it in only 2012. They started doing it way back from 2006, 2007 onwards. And the same is the case with all these banks. If you see, these are all huge global banks, and every bank is involved in this kind of a LIBOR scandal. Then people realized this is not going to work out. As in, we need to come up with some kind of a reform to ensure that these financial markets are regulated. And as we have seen initially, the impact is huge. As in, if a regulator comes back tomorrow and say that no, I'm stopping LIBOR, then it's going to result in a financial market collapse. So what they said, they came up with some kind of an idea of, okay, slow transition from LIBOR. That started, I mean, the discussion started way back in 2012, and they have come up with, then there is something called as a weekly review of LIBOR in 2012, and then FCA has started regulating this entire episode. And the three different things which they have done are, the first thing they said is, okay, we agree that LIBOR is not correct, but we have to live with that LIBOR for some time. So how do we live with that? So they said that until now, LIBOR is quoted using a very in a very informal way from the British Bankers Association. So they said that we will take away the way the LIBOR is quoted from the British Bankers Association to something called as an ICE benchmark administration, which is a formal way of quoting LIBOR. So that is the first reform they have taken. What is the difference between an informal way of quoting LIBOR and a formal way of quoting LIBOR? A very quick difference between how British Bankers Association was giving quotes versus how the LIBOR is, how ICE benchmark administration is giving quotes. So typically all the other processes same in terms of the collection, calculation, publication, and everything, but they have addressed the main problem. In the way the LIBOR rates are published, or the way the LIBOR rates are submitted by these panel banks. So the way they have submitted in the BBA is that they started with an expert, as I mentioned, in the BBA world, everything is based on expert judgment. Banks need not give any kind of justification on how the quotes are given. Basically, they can give any quote they want to. So obviously that led to some kind of a LIBOR manipulation. So in the ICE benchmarking world, what they said is that no, whenever you are giving any quote, just follow this waterfall methodology. The level one is all the quotes which you give need to be based on the transactions, actual transactions. So you cannot give some quotes which are not based on the actual transactions. Even if you want to give a lower LIBOR quote, you cannot. Then the second thing is they said that, okay, if actual transactions are not available, move to something called as a derived transactions. That is, if say 3-month LIBOR is not available, then move to something like take the 1-month LIBOR and a 6-month LIBOR and do some kind of an interpolation to arrive at a 3-month LIBOR rather than giving some expert judgment. And the third one, although they call it an expert judgment, that is also kind of more scientific. They said that if no quotes are available for that particular currency across tenors, then go into some other market. As in, if LIBOR market is not giving quotes, go to OIS market and get the quotes. So by doing this thing, they have reformed the problematic LIBOR up to some extent. So this is the first reform that the FCA has taken, moving from BBA to ICE. Then the second reform they started doing is, okay, again, as I said in the initial slides, that around $400 trillion worth notional is referencing LIBOR right now. A lot of loans, derivatives, everything is referencing LIBOR. And frankly speaking, nobody envisaged a world without LIBOR. So what was happening is all the contracts do not have any fallback language. When I say fallback language, what it means is what will happen to the payment of the coupon, for example, if I'm talking about in a layman's language, a retail loan, what will happen to the coupon payment if it is linked to LIBOR when LIBOR is not existent anymore. So, so for that, there is no proper fallback language that is being inserted. So again, the regulators came and said that you need to have a proper fallback language in terms of a fallback rate and then a fallback spread, and also what is the pre-cessation or a permanent cessation trigger. So this is something which they have come up with. Every bank is given an instruction that pre to 2021, every bank has to insert this fallback language in all the legacy transactions which are expiring beyond 2021. Again, I'll come to what is the 2021, why I am stressing on the 2021. So FCA has come up with the third major transition milestone. They said that, okay, these two things are only temporary solutions. The major permanent solution is that we need to go away from the way the current LIBOR is quoted. So we need to come up with a newer benchmark, which is more robust, more reliable, and has more governance framework around that. So every bank, so every central bank in across the country was asked to set up a working group comprising of people from, I would say, investment banks, insurance firms, clearing houses, asset managers, consulting firms, and everyone. And they said, you guys do the brainstorming and come up with one alternate reference rate for your particular currency, which would replace LIBOR. And I am not going to tell you this is the best rate and this is the best rate. You guys need to determine and come up with one alternate benchmark. And they said that after 2021, FCA will not compel any banks to quote LIBOR anymore. So what essentially it means is that post 2021, if any financial institution has any product referencing LIBOR, then they will not have any mechanism to price that product, do the risk management of that product. They cannot even sell that product. So again, now in this slide, I quickly talked about what are the alternate reference rates for all these major 5 currencies. Again, whenever I talk about this IBOR transition, just remember that this is not just something which is happening globally. This is going to impact India also in a very, very big time. The reason being, dollar LIBOR is used to determine even Indian benchmark rates. And a lot of our Indian financial institutions have a lot of liabilities referencing foreign currency exchange for foreign currency benchmarks like a US dollar or a GBP dollar in the form of a corporate loan or a syndicated loan or external commercial borrowing, so on. Now in this thing, now quickly I'll just touch upon this thing before moving into some technical details on the differences between LIBOR and ARR. So when I say ARR, it's an alternate reference rate. They are very different for every currency. For example, in dollar, this working group which is set up by the central bank has come up with something called as a secured overnight financing rate. How this is computed. Again, the biggest problem about LIBOR is that it's a pooled rate. So they said that this secured overnight financing rate is fully transaction based. And when it is fully transaction based also, they increase the pool of participants in this thing. So specifically, if you compare it with say something like an effective federal funds rate, effective for funds rate is still a kind of a transaction based rate, but limited to only banks, whereas this particular secured overnight financing rate is covering the entire financial industry in the overnight repo market. So the first thing that they did is that they made it fully transaction based. And another major difference between ARR and LIBOR is that all these rates are all overnight. So they're all nearly risk-free. I'll come to the point why they want it to be risk-free. Why can't they have something like a LIBOR? There are a lot of pitfalls in that. I'll come to that maybe in the next slide. And so this dollar LIBOR, this dollar working group has come up with replacing it with a SOFR rate. Whereas this SOFR rate is a brand new rate which was invented in April 2018. Whereas GBP in the UK market, they said that no, we don't want to invent a new rate. We would like to continue with the same overnight rate SONIA, but obviously they wanted to reform that SONIA to be more representative of the market transactions across the financial industry. So they came up with something called as a reformed SONIA. And again, this is also fully transaction based, so on. As in, I don't want to cover each and every rate, but effectively you would have seen the difference now. That LIBOR had a term structure, whereas all these alternate reference rates are only overnight. They don't have a term structure. So there are some pitfalls of not having a term structure. I'll talk about it in the next slides. The second thing is that these are all nearly risk-free. And whether these are going to be effective instruments as a replacement for LIBOR, I don't know, maybe time need to tell, because still there are some concerns around these alternate reference rates. But the way things are going on, it looks imminent that LIBOR is going to go away by the end of 2021. So before getting into talking about some technical details on the differences between LIBOR and the alternate reference rates, I just want to quickly browse through. I know that this is a very, very busy slide. I don't want to talk about each and every transition roadmap timelines, but quickly, two things which I want to highlight here is that, as I said, these working groups, I think everything happens with a lag in the world. So FCA has come up with this idea of replacing LIBOR way back in 2014. However, nobody did anything till 2017, and in 2018 they realized that no, now the timelines are approaching, so we need to do something. So they started forming all these working groups, so on and so forth. And in April 2018, I think this is a major milestone across. In April 2018, in both US and UK, they came up with these alternate reference rates. They said that SOFR is going to be the alternate reference rate. And there is no dispute there because this is determined by the market. This is not enforced by some regulator. So there is no dispute as such at that time. And so these two, once they started introducing SOFR and SONIA, obviously from May onwards, SOFR futures started trading. And even the clearing houses also started switching the discount rate from the effective federal funds rate to SOFR, so on and so forth. And the most important timeline here, as you see, is by the end of 2021, LIBOR will not exist anymore. At least that is what the potential deadline, I would say, unless and until this COVID crisis balloons up and something happens, where the regulators think that, okay, we cannot do this transition right now and we need to push the timelines maybe 6 months or 1 year. But as recent as maybe 1 week back, FCA has actually come up with a statement saying that we are not going to move the timelines. We will maybe move some of these intermittent timelines, but we will not move the end timeline of 2021 to move away from LIBOR. So this is kind of clear now. LIBOR days are numbered now. So moving on, see how the markets are taking it. And then in terms of the market evolution, if you see, as you saw in the previous slide, SOFR futures started from May 2018, and it's a clear uptrend. It's a clear uptrend in terms of the SOFR futures volumes and open interest, and even this is the average daily volumes, and this is the open interest. You see that the open interest is also going up on a daily basis. So there is a slight dip in April 2020, but we expect that to be more of a blip and an anomaly rather than something which we see going forward. So you see that there is a clear uptrend in the SOFR futures volume traded. And the second graph is even more interesting. I think if you see that, See, obviously, a lot of these global banks are pressurized by the regulators also that you need to do your funding in SOFR going forward. As in, obviously, when the entire financial market has to move away from LIBOR, this has to be taken up by the heavyweights, the likes of JP Morgan, or the Citibanks of the world have to start trading in SOFR. If they are not doing trading in SOFR, this is exactly what is happening when I go and talk to the Indian counterparts, Indian financial institutions, or even the regional banks in the Middle East. They say that my counterparts, if they are not trading with more sophisticated systems, with more advanced approaches, how can we transition away? So the regulators have come up with a very, very clear guidance that all of you guys need to start issuing SOFR-based products. So all these banks are, I would say, very intelligent. They started issuing the SOFR products. You see that the volume in the SOFR products is also increasing, but there is a clear thing which is missing here. But all these products, if you see, all these products are less than 2 years. So SOFR products are being issued by these global banks as per the guidance from the regulator, but still they are not issuing long-dated SOFR futures. The reason why they are not issuing long-dated SOFR bonds or loans is, there are multiple reasons, but one major reason is that their funding continues to be in LIBOR. As in, people who understand this concept of the asset liability management and the fund transfer pricing, etc., for every bank, their funding is linked to one benchmark or the other. So their funding is here in this case linked to LIBOR. So when they are issuing any SOFR-based products, so their products are in different currencies. They have issued a SOFR-based derivative, for example. Their funding is happening in LIBOR, but their derivative is in SOFR. So they will not be able to hedge the transaction clearly. So what the banks are doing is they are issuing SOFR-based products only for short term, because they can get into a SOFR LIBOR basis swaps, and SOFR basis LIBOR basis swaps are only of lower maturity. As in, right now, if you go to Bloomberg and see the volumes of the SOFR LIBOR basis swaps, you see that the volumes are majorly less than 18 months. So as the volumes of the SOFR LIBOR basis swaps are less than 18 months, if these banks are issuing SOFR-based products greater than 2 years, they cannot hedge it. So their books will run that risk of asset liability mismatch, which would lead to a lot of complications going forward. So the banks are very cautious in doing that. So they are increasing the volumes, but still there is a concern that long-term SOFR products are not yet seen. Now I'm getting into a little bit more technical thing. Bear with me. I don't want to get into too many technical details, but I just want to lay down all the quants who are there in this call, who enjoy the pricing and everything. A little bit more technical detail is, you see that SOFR is a complete overnight rate, whereas LIBOR by definition, it's the interbank lending rate, and the interbank lending rate is for AA rated banks, and it also has a term structure. So if you look at the differences between LIBOR and SOFR, LIBOR has both the credit risk part as well as the liquidity part, whereas SOFR is having only a risk-free component. So stripping out the entire credit risk from SOFR, which is actually very good to do. As in, if you ask any derivative traders, they'll say that it's really good to have the sensitivity stripped between the rates and the credit, because I'll be able to hedge that easily. As in, I'll know what is the credit risk, and I'll go into the market and buy a CDS, which might be a little tough in a LIBOR market. So all is good. But the only thing is, again, intuitively, what would you expect? I mean, if you see this, SOFR has only overnight credit risk free component, whereas LIBOR has 3 components. You expect always that SOFR rate should be lesser than LIBOR, typically, because SOFR is risk free. But again, things happen in a very strange way in the interbank markets. So what exactly happened? And I want to point out this graph between SOFR and LIBOR in September 2019. What happened is, there are a lot of the corporate tax payments that are due, and there is a newer issuance of investment grade debt, and every bank in US wanted to buy that investment grade debt. So obviously they don't have cash. So they kept on going into the overnight repo market, and they started borrowing from there. So obviously there is a huge stress in the overnight interbank market that actually led to a huge demand in the repo market segment, which led to a spike in the SOFR rate. And the spike is not a normal spike. If you see that the rates were close to 2%, and at one point in time, the rate went all the way to 5.5%. Actually, if you see the intraday rate, it even crosses something like 8%. So there is a huge problem there. So, and nothing to do, as in, if I have issued a loan denominated in SOFR, there is absolutely no problem with my credit risk worthiness or with the markets, but just because of the demand and supply of the overnight cash transactions, overnight repo market, SOFR has behaved wildly in September 2019, and the rates have ballooned. Then Fed had to interfere and started pumping liquidity into the market to bring the SOFR rate close to zero, close to, I would say, LIBOR, or not zero. So what people started realizing is the problem with LIBOR is not completely gone away when we have SOFR also. What is the problem with LIBOR? The problem with LIBOR is it is not completely market driven. Markets do not like anything which is not market driven. So when there is a rigging, they don't like. And when there is a regulatory intervention, they don't like. And in LIBOR, there is a rigging, whereas in SOFR, there was a regulatory intervention in September. So people started questioning SOFR, and again, things started. And actually, what happened is that people who wanted to issue SOFR-based loans started moving away from SOFR to LIBOR from October 2019. And the trend continued until maybe around Feb. And obviously, in Feb and March, something unprecedented and none of us in our lifetime has seen has happened. The COVID crisis has taken all of us for a ride, and what happened is that regulators across the world started getting into a panic mode, and they started slashing the interest rates to inject the liquidity, what we call as a quantitative easing, a technical terminology. And quantitative easing, because SOFR is very close to Fed funds rate, it started going down to zero. Whereas LIBOR continued to be in that range of 1 to 1.5%. So LIBOR SOFR basis, which is in the range of around 20 to 25 basis points, has started ballooning again. But this time, unlike in September 2019, where SOFR ballooned, this time SOFR shrinks, and the rates have fallen close to zero. Okay, so moving forward. Okay, very quickly, I don't want to again spend too much time on this thing. I want to talk about a specific example of a retail loan. If some person has taken a retail loan, how will the behavior be if I'm away from LIBOR to that? So this is very, very critical, because when I'm moving away from LIBOR to alternate reference rate, one quick thing is I need to move away from LIBOR to alternate reference rate, but obviously these two are not comparable, as we have seen in the previous slide. The ARR rate, when I say ARR, it's an alternate reference rate general term, but in US it is called SOFR. So SOFR rate is less than LIBOR. So to make the transactions equivalent, I need to add a spread. As in, again, from the quantitative lingo, I need to add a spread to make the PV same. So I need to find out that particular spread, which will make PV of LIBOR is equal to PV when I'm using it using ARR. So this is something which I need to find out. So what is that methodology with which I'll find out the PV? So here people have come up with a lot of ideas. A forward term structure is also not available for SOFR. So, and there are two different approaches they talk about. One is called as HMA approach. This is what we written here. Is that proposed this? They said that let's not do any forward modeling. Let's just take historical LIBOR SOFR difference as a 5-year median difference and apply that over LIBOR, over SOFR to make this particular transaction equivalent to this particular transaction. So the other methodology is obviously to make NPV neutral, and there is no still consensus in the markets on what methodology needs to be used. Because if I use a PV neutral approach, there are other risks around conduct risk, etc. Because when I'm matching the PVs and finding out that particular spread which would make the PV sequel, that would result in different spreads applied to different counterparties. And obviously, financial institutions are smarter than the investors. They will start manipulating that. So regulators are not liking that, but obviously there is not clear consensus in what needs to be done. One quick thing before I move on to the impact for the banks, etc., is that this 3-month LIBOR plus margin for this particular deal, the payment on March 31st is determined on Jan 1st. This is in the LIBOR world. Whereas in ARR world, this is backward looking. So the payment on March 31st is determined only 5 days before. So again, a major problem here. In terms of every retail investor would like to have certainty in the cash flow. So the cash flow certainty would go away. So this is a major problem that people are not liking a backward looking approach. But obviously, until the forward term structure develops, people need to deal with that. And how will a forward term structure develop? Only when more SOFR futures and SOFR options derivatives start trading. So quickly, I'm just moving forward on the.
Subbu, just so because the previous slide, so I thought it was fairly complicated just for my own understanding, right? So there are two messages. One is that the way calculate that. So basically, most of the loans are LIBOR plus 300 bips, right? That's the margin. 300 bips is the margin. That will remain the same even here. But only that, how do you account for the credit risk and other factors between LIBOR and ARR? That's the X, right? And,
exactly.
And how we determine that X, there has been different methodologies. Like obviously, you mentioned this present value based on LIBOR should be the same as present value based on ARR, and that's one methodology. Or potentially just look at historical basis and come up with some median numbers. That's a methodology. So that's basically how you calculate X. But the second message in the slide is that LIBOR is essentially forward-looking, whereas you can estimate 3-month LIBOR, which is a number today. So you have a certain cash flow. Whereas in ARR, you only know the cash flow after the 3 months have passed. So that's the distinction between ARR.
Yes, correct. So this distinction has actually led to a lot of problems also, because people are saying that then we can potentially use the same ARR, but it is fixed 3-month back, which is a backward looking rate based on the rates that are set 6 months back. Even the discussions are happening on that thing also, but there's no consensus in that sense. And there are a lot of working groups trying to figure out what needs to be done.
Got it. Yeah, please.
Oh yeah. So quickly, I think now I'm conscious of the time we have. So I will quickly run through what is the impact on the financial institutions. I think until now I talked about the LIBOR background, history, the replacement with the IBOR, with the all ARR and everything. But what will happen to a bank, for example? So there are different departments. Each and every department will get impacted. The major departments I would like to, again, I think people who are attending this session will not, mostly again, apologies if I'm wrong, but they may not have a legal background, etc. So I am focusing on the impact in the sales and trading, market risk, credit risk, and treasury, and something up to finance and accounting. So all these areas, if you see, the pricing, if you are a derivative trader, for example, all the derivatives that you are trading will reference to LIBOR in one way or the other. So now, and derivatives traders, I mean, you will understand that if you are trading in any options, etc., forward term structure is very important. Now you are moving away from that. So pricing is going to be a big challenge. And effectively, you don't have proper systems also to do the pricing. And obviously, I'll not talk about CVA, FVA, etc., because this is done by majorly global banks. But here the curve management is another thing, because as you know, the LIBOR curves are constructed, the zero curves are constructed basis the forward term structure, whereas ARR doesn't have, but you still need to have an ARR curve bootstrapped and everything. And from the market risk point of view, very basic thing, it requires historical data. I have a lot of reservations on the way the value at risk is computed right now. However, right now the value at risk and stress testing is done using historical data, and this is a major problem because all these alternate difference rate data is available only from 2018 onwards. And market risk Basel 2.5 capital requires something called as an SVAR. As in, people who are from market risk background here would realize that. And SVAR requires time period going back till 2008, and you don't have any time series. So how do you deal with the situation? You need to do some kind of an interpolation or use some kind of exotic machine learning techniques, which we are actually working on. But again, there's a major problem for the market risk guys. And also from the credit risk, from the counterparty side also, how do you calculate the exposures, which you are using some advanced methodologies? And again, from the hedge accounting point of view, the hedges will go for a toss. As in, my hedge initially used to be only, as in, to give you a simple example, my derivatives would transition ahead of the loan market. So my derivatives will be priced using ARR, whereas my loan market will be still in LIBOR. So obviously the hedges would fail. So what will happen if the hedges are going to fail? Are we going to put the capital separate for both the instruments? And what are the impacts that are going to be? It's going to be very interesting times ahead, I would say. And quickly, I don't want to run through each and every slide. Quickly on the asset manager perspective.
I think your voice broke a little. So what you said about hedge accounting is that essentially there were, so since loan and derivative, right? That's how you hedge it. So derivatives will be ARR, whereas loan will continue to be in LIBOR until later, right? So derivatives will move first and loans will move later. So the hedge will fail. And therefore, capital needs to be allocated to both legs and not to the net exposure. That's what you're saying.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. And from the asset manager point of view, also just think about it as in fixed income asset managers who are all there in this call. You will realize that fixed income products are all again LIBOR-based bonds or mortgage-backed securities which you buy. Everything, if it is maturing beyond 2021, need to be repapered. So all the products would go for a toss. And again, this is from the sales point of view, a treasury sales guy or an asset manager sales guy, they need to come up with something new. I think they need to come up with a new range of ERR products because all the products which are now offered in the market to the customers kind of linked to LIBOR. Now they need to start offering products linked to ERR. And most important thing from the asset manager point of view is to create alpha to the clients, right? And how do you compute the alpha? As in, you compute alpha by taking LIBOR as a benchmark. If LIBOR itself is going away, there is no benchmark at all. That's a major problem for all the fixed income asset managers. And apart from that, obviously, I don't want to spend too much time, but a common problem across asset managers and the bankers is that the systems, the models, the processes, everything would go for a toss because whatever is happening previously would not apply here because systems are geared for dual curve, are not geared for a dual curve framework. Now they need to price both ARR based products as well as LIBOR based products, and ARR based products are all backward looking, another problem. And that's going to create a huge system overhaul, I would say. And clearly this is going to be a very interesting time for the asset management firms also. And from the Indian again, what is the impact from the India point of view? I kind of touched upon these points clearly initially. But from the India point of view, you see that, first of all, a lot of these Indian banks and Indian financial institutions go into take loans in the foreign currency, denominated assets. So what will happen is that they need to go back and hedge that using MIFOR. So, and MIFOR, as you know, this is nothing but LIBOR plus some forward points, dollar INR forward points. My handwriting is very bad. Excuse me for that. So what will happen if LIBOR is going away? Then this MIFOR rate also will not be applicable anymore. So the biggest risk that every bank would run is they will not be able to borrow in the dollar market if they do not move away from IFOR. Actually, the Indian Banking Association also have started some progress on that. They started a working group on the LIBOR transition, including a lot of the financial institutions. And the first step they said is that every financial institution need to do a MIFOR exposure in their books, and also come up with an alternate MIFOR-based methodology. How do you reform MIFOR? Like Sonia, what is the reformed MIFOR methodology when LIBOR moves away to SOFR? So that is something which they have asked, but it is still work in progress given that current crisis situation. The regulator is also taking it a little slow. Obviously, once LIBOR goes away, we don't have any option there but to move away. And the quicker we act, the better it is, because time is not in our side in this thing. Yeah, quickly, I have done any questions on this thing. I'm ready to take, Shiva.
Yeah, thanks, Subbu. I think it was an insightful presentation, right? So you covered basically what is IBOR, what were the issues, why did we think about transition? I think you took us through the differences between IBORs and ARRs. You introduced some terms like SOFR and SONIA, and you talked about the differences. And then you showed like exactly what the actual evolution was between LIBOR and SOFR in terms of rates and the spikes in September. I think you also spoke about the impact and what is the impact in India also looks like, right? So I have a few questions from the members. So I think the first question is if when SOFR and the likes of actual transactions based rates, then credit risk and liquid tenor adjustments will also be there, right? So I mean, it's like if it's actual transaction, the borrower's riskiness will be baked in, right? So why do you say it's a risk-free rate?
Yeah. Okay. So this is, again, if I'll take the example of SOFR here. SOFR is based on the overnight repo transaction, and we need to keep US Treasury securities as collateral. So what essentially happens is, irrespective of the credit risk of the borrower, we have a collateral which is nearly risk-free. And most importantly, the riskiness of the borrower increases if the tenor increases. And that is the precise reason why, to remove all the riskiness of the benchmark, they have made all the benchmarks overnight. So these are the two reasons why typically all these ARR-based rates are called as nearly risk-free rates. They are not completely risk-free as such.
Yeah, not completely. Okay, got you. So I think you kind of touch upon the next question, like why do we need to move to these ARRs at all instead of just reforming LIBOR with stringent regulations?
Yeah, so that's what they did initially. As in, I would say that they initially thought that they will reform the LIBOR with a stringent regulation, but the problem there for LIBOR still exists, because there are a lot of currencies where and also a lot of tenor points where the LIBOR is not yet liquid. As in, if you see the ICE benchmarking administration rules, they did not say that every transaction need to be, every quote need to be based on transactions that have happened in the interbank market, because they also realized that a lot of the transactions, a lot of the tenors and a lot of currencies may not be liquid, because we are talking about not just one LIBOR, Siva. We are talking about 35 LIBOR points on a daily basis, and getting enough quotes for 35 LIBOR points is not easy. And whenever you have, you do not have any kind of a transaction scheme, enough number of transactions, I would say, then there is always a problem of potential manipulation. So they started doing all these things, but they realized that it is not sustainable in the long run. So you need to move away. And also another problem which I kind of touched upon when I'm talking about the differences between LIBOR and ARR is that they want a pure interest rate benchmark. They don't want a benchmark which has a credit risk component also, because it is it will make credit markets and interest rate markets very clear and segregated.
Got you. So the next question is, I mean, you talked about MIFOR, But what about my BOR? Is there a problem? Like, I mean, like the methodology for my BOR, are there any issues with it? And like, because RBI recently said banks can use alternative reference rates for banks giving out loans to borrowers and whatnot. So is there a
Yeah.
potential problem with my?
Yeah. So again, that's a very, very good question. So MIBOR is the kind of setup for MIBOR is very similar to LIBOR. I think it's also based on the pooled rate across multiple banks based in Mumbai. But as of now, I think the major Indian benchmark that is going to have a major impact is going to be MIFOR and not MIBOR. The reason is MIBOR is anyway still overnight. So there is not much problem. Moreover, as in this is something which we need to take with a pinch of salt, is that all the financial institutions wait for the regulator to say something on the transition. So what will happen to MIBOR? Number one, regulator has to come up and say that no, MIBOR also we will scrap and we will use something different, like a SOFR, or because see, LIBOR transitioning is not going to impact MIBOR here. LIBOR transitioning is going to impact only MIFOR. So in that way, the major impact is going to be on MIFOR rather than MIBOR.
Got you. Got you. Got you. I think I mean, you probably covered some of it. So the question is, you know, there is obviously going to be a huge impact on, you know, on the exposure and valuations when we move from LIBOR to alternative reference rates. How is the industry generally responding? What is the level of preparedness? Are they prepared to go to 2021 and move away from all of it? How do you generally say the state of preparedness?
Yeah, see, I would say that again, I worked with multiple global banks as well as some of the regional banks. So one thing I can say is that the global banks are obviously much better prepared than a lot of the regional banks in that sense. And even the global banks also are not completely prepared for this transition right now. If you ask anyone that are they completely prepared, they are not. And it has nothing to, I mean, there are some problems from the bank side, but majorly to do with the way the industry has evolved. Say if I take one global investment bank and if I ask them, why aren't you transitioning? Their answer would be, see, I would like to transition, but as I clearly pointed out, they are even proactively issuing this SOFR-based debt and all, but obviously their funding continues to be in LIBOR. So until LIBOR ceases to exist, this problem is going to continue. This problem is going to be there. It's like a chicken and egg situation that until LIBOR is gone completely, SOFR volumes will not pick up in the longer term. And what regulators are doing, as in regulators and FCA have realized this problem. So they are saying that, okay, this is the concern. So let me do one thing. As in they have, at least in the Bank of England has actually come up with a guidance. They said that post Q3 2020, none of the banks are allowed to issue any GBP LIBOR based loans. So again, after this COVID situation, they said that, okay, Q3 2020 might be aggressive because a lot of these COVID loans are actually given referencing LIBOR. They said that they extended it till Q1 2021. So effectively, the regulators, once they stop or put a cap on the bank saying that you cannot issue any debt referencing LIBOR, then obviously their funding rate starts moving away from LIBOR to the alternate reference rate. And once that happens, everything will fall in place. But yeah, that's the reason why I said, as in we are in very, very interesting times, because next 1.5 years is going to be very, very interesting, because regulators are not budging and banks are also trying to figure out some way or the other. And on top of it, there is a COVID crisis. People are trying to divert the resources towards COVID stress testing. So yeah, let's see what will happen over the next 6 months. Next 6 months are going to be very, very critical.
Got you. It looks like a technical question. So you mentioned that, so there is a, like, there will be derived codes and there are expert judgment and so on. The way things LIBOR as it stands. So if in case there is a level 2 or a level 3 or whatever, like, more and more of expert judgment, is there any kind of spread added to the eventual rate in the methodology?
No, no, not yet. Because the ICE benchmark administration, even if there are a lot of codes or if the methodology, etc., they come up finally with one rate which are published in Bloomberg. So that rate is kind of, the methodology is transparent. It's kind of told to us, but in the methodology, they did not talk about any spread. If they are adding it something separately on top of it, at least that's not made public.
Right. Got you. So
and one quick thing, as in, regarding the previous question, Shiva, I just want to add, regulators are also disincentivizing usage of LIBOR. One thing which again UK has done is, for all the LIBOR-based collaterals, they are increasing the haircut a lot. So if you are doing any transactions and you are putting any LIBOR-based collateral in the clearinghouse, then the collateral haircut is going to increase from 20% to all the way until 100% by the end of 2021. So obviously, if banks are holding LIBOR-based debt or LIBOR-based securities, it's going to be penalizing for the banks. So that is what the regulators are also doing to ensure that people are actually transitioning in the right time.
Got you. The next question is around contracts. So are there already clauses, like sunset clauses inserted in the contracts which say that, we will move to a different rates from 2021, or we'll do something else? Like, what kind of changes are getting inserted into existing contracts?
Yeah, this is a good question actually. So what happened is, there are, if you talk about any bank, there are three different kinds of contracts. The one thing is legacy exposures, which are referencing LIBOR, but expiring before 2021. So nothing need to be done because they are anyway expiring before 2021. So no need to do anything because LIBOR will be present until 2021. The second kind of contracts are, again, long-term loans, mortgage-backed loans, etc., which are expiring post 2021. There we need to do something, basically, because post 2021, how do you pay the coupon, for example, because LIBOR is not available. And the third kind of loans are, I think, which are far and few, is that SOFR-based loans are also started in the market. So if SOFR-based loans are coming in the market, again, there is no problem. So if you think about all the three different kinds of loans, the major problem is only the second type of loans, which are LIBOR-based loans expiring beyond 2021. For that, as I briefly touched upon, they said that all these loans need to be repapered. When I say repapered, what needs to be done is, you need to go and explain the client that LIBOR is going to go away. And if the loan is, say, LIBOR plus 200 basis points, potentially, if you repaper the contract, it will become something like, say, SOFR plus 300 basis points, because obviously SOFR is less riskier. And then explain the client why that 100 basis points is coming, and then repaper the contract by inserting this fallback language in terms of the rate LIBOR moving away from LIBOR to SOFR, then what is the spread that is used, and the spread methodology, and finally the date on which you are actually going to transition. Is it going to be, say, the 2nd of January 2022, or it's going to be something else? That also needs to be put. And there is a lot of work for the legal guys also, because, I think whenever any contract needs to be repapered, the language needs to be watertight. Otherwise, banks are going to be in kind of a litigation problem. So all these things are happening. And a lot of the banks actually started digitizing the contracts also. Banks are in a very, very bad position right now, as I say. They even do not know how many contracts are there across product categories, across geographies, across departments. And they are all in physical format right now. Even if I'm talking about global banks, they are in physical format. And repapering the physical contracts is not easy. Now, the first step is to digitize the contracts and then read the clauses and then replace the clauses. It's a major exercise.
Okay. So we are hour, so maybe I'll just take one last question, and then we can close this session. So I think it's a very interesting question. That's why I had to take this. What will be the impact of you moving to the new rates on monetary policy transmission? You said Fed intervened and so forth. So, and if things move this way for other markets, what is the impact of this on monetary policy transmission?
Yeah, very interesting question. I think, see, again, if you are talking from the regulator's point of view, the Fed or in India's case, it's RBI and everything, they are mostly bothered about the quantitative tightening or quantitative easing and how to control the inflation, so on and so forth. They are not too much bothered about, again, obviously there is a concern there, but from the quantitative easing point of view or something like that, see, they will keep controlling the Fed funds rate. There's a Fed funds target range which they'll keep controlling. But unfortunately, if you compare with the previous era, LIBOR will not move as much as Fed funds rate is moving, whereas SOFR is kind of linked to Fed funds rate. So there is an indirect impact when regulator wants to do a quantitative easing or a quantitative tightening. Obviously, a SOFR rate also will keep fluctuating. And there is in that sense, there is an impact because LIBOR SOFR basis will move a lot. It's in normal times, it's around 20 basis points, but if Fed starts interfering, it can go as high as 150 basis points and all. So what effectively happens is, obviously all the contracts referencing SOFR without any mistake of theirs, basically without increase in any credit risk or any change in the market, they have to maybe in some cases pay higher interest rate or lower interest rate. So there is going to be a negative impact. Actually, I think this is the major concern that has surfaced after September 2019, where all these global banks have raised a concern that why can't we have an alternate reference rate apart from SOFR? So actually, in US, something called as an IBOR is also under discussion. Where all the small banks said that our funding continues to be in SOFR. So we cannot fund in SOFR. As in big banks can continue to fund in SOFR, but we cannot have access to those high quality treasury securities. So we should rather have something similar to LIBOR, and our funding can be closer to that, something called as an IBOR. But yeah, that is not yet finalized and people are discussing, but I don't think that will be approved because it still has a credit risk component.
All right. So I think we can go on and on, but we are at the end of the hour. Thank you so much for sharing with your insights. As a reminder to our listeners, please do complete the evaluation survey that appeared on your screen if you haven't done so. And CFA India, CFA Society India members can claim professional learning credit by logging in their professional learning tracker. Thank you for participating in today's webinar. That will be all.
Thank you.